All right, how are you guys today?
Doing all right.
Doing well. How are you doing today? We hope you're all doing well wherever you are on this big isolated planet. I'm Dave Eicher.
I'm Jeff Hester.
I'm with
Allison
Jeff
Klesman.
Hester and Allison Klesman. Sorry, guys.
We just beat you
And
up.
here
That's
we
all.
are. And here we are. May the fourth be with you.
Yes.
May the fourth be with you.
May the fourth be with you. Yes, May 4th. So really, you've got your Jurassic Park cap there. You
I have
should
a Jurassic Park hat and a Star
your
Wars
Jurassic
shirt. So.
Park and a what? What have
and a
you
Star
got?
Wars shirt.
And a Star Wars
Because
shirt.
it's Star Wars Day.
Who's on the Star Wars shirt?
It's Han Solo.
Oh, okay. A very young Han
Yes.
Solo. Okay.
Yes, from the original trilogy.
All right.
When that was all there was.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, no, I had a good weekend. I did a fun thing this weekend. I did a podcast. What's it called? Cosmos with Cosmos, or the Cosmos with Cosmos, or something like that, which is a thing that Mike George and company out of they're up in Salt Lake City do. And yeah, it's a little bit more R-rated than what we do. And I should probably point out, we went on for like 3.5 hours. To the folk out there, no, we are not going to go on for 3.5 hours on this thing. And I think I started with about yay much scotch, and I think I ended with, but anyway. So what did you do this weekend, Allison?
I went running because it was nice outside.
Yeah.
And then I cleaned my kitchen. I think that was it. I'm methodically cleaning my whole house because what else am I gonna do?
There you go.
I
Dave?
I got a lot of work done and I ran around our neighborhood and exercised. It was 80 degrees Fahrenheit in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
For 2 days, and now it's 40.
Now it's 20 degrees colder today.
I was gonna say 80 degrees already sounds 20 degrees colder from the Phoenix perspective.
Right.
So
it was nice the weekend here, and so a lot got done and a lot of astronomy too. So
Good.
Good stuff. But today we're going to talk about something that's fascinating and amazing and interesting to people, and maybe a little bit disturbing and upsetting to some people too. And
a
that's
little wildly counterintuitive anyway.
wildly counterintuitive. Chaos in the universe, chaos theory. I think it was George Carlin who said that when he was young and he discovered that the universe operated on chaos and that things went from order to disorder, he thought, this is a really fundamentally good thing. I'm glad to know this, he thought. So we'll see if that's your view as well. And Allison, you're going to give us an introduction, I think, from Hollywood.
Yes, so the reason for the Jurassic Park hat is because I was thinking that most people probably watching this or not watching this are familiar with chaos theory from Jurassic Park, from the character of Ian Malcolm.
That's actually an interesting question. Is there anybody? We have some viewers who, in principle, are able to comment live on YouTube.
That would require me to open YouTube, but
that would require you to open.
Why would I do that?
Just turn the volume down when you do.
Going.
So presumably, if anybody out there is not familiar with Jurassic Park, they will let us know.
You need to fix that problem right now.
Right.
I will lend you my VHS, which is how I have the movie, because I never bothered buying it on DVD after I owned it on VHS, because some of us still have VCRs.
There you go. So anyway, Jurassic Park and chaos theory.
Right. So again, as they're taking this tour of the island before everything goes wrong, thanks to chaos theory, he's explaining, this chaos theory through one of the most, I think, again, familiar ways that people explain it, which is that a butterfly can flap its wings in, say, Peking and cause a hurricane halfway around the world. And this is a very foreign concept to a lot of people, but it's very fundamental, again, to a lot of science. And also, I did a recent article for Discover magazine on weather, and it's the same thing. Weather is another, very familiar thing to all of us. And, you can predict the weather very well, for a couple days, and then you can predict it pretty well, maybe out to a week or 2 or 3. But there actually becomes a point at which you just cannot predict the weather because it is a chaotic system, and a very, very tiny change will affect these very large changes, especially over, days and weeks. And you no longer, any prediction you make is just, it's just garbage. You can't.
Do you know where the
really
term
predict it.
do you know where the term butterfly effect came from?
I do. I would have to actually go look at my notes because I don't remember it was through weather, but I
Yeah,
can't remember the name of the guy who came up with it. But
the guy that sort of made chaos theory a thing was a guy by the name of Ed Lorenz.
yes.
And it was in the
It wasn't that long ago, really.
the paper came out in like 72 or something like that. And what he was doing was he was modeling weather systems. He was looking at the equations that describe some hydrodynamic things that go on with weather. And he'd run his simulations, and then he'd run them again, he thought, with exactly the same parameters, and get completely different results. And it turned out, I want to say, Dave, do you remember? It turned out that it was that once he had things set to single precision floating point, and then he had things set to double precision floating point.
I think it was something like that, where again, and obviously with the measurements we can take with weather, you can only make them to whatever precision point. And if you go one precision point further, then everything just becomes unpredictable.
So this tiny little change, and the whole thing just completely goes to
And so with weather, at least the outcome was that we will never be able to predict the weather more than a couple weeks out, because it's just impossible. But it also comes into play with a lot of other things, and weather is the most familiar, but now we have a pandemic going on, and that is also one of those.
That's also chaotic.
One of those things.
Indeed. Indeed. What's your favorite example of chaos, Dave?
Well, I like to think of it in a pandemic like this, and the fact that many people underappreciate the complexity of what's going on here, and think that what they hear is much simpler than the reality that's actually happening, that we don't know, and that is an enormous system like weather that involves quadrillions of particles and so on, that you cannot track what's going on and all the factors in it. And I think also, let me ask you two this, there's something about human nature that really is upset by chaos. Despite what George Carlin said about the fascination with unpredictability, humans seem to be upset by that. And a lot of people really are unhappy, I think, with the fact that very small things in a system can have an enormous effect on a greater system. That just seems counterintuitive to a lot of people. And it even happens in the humanities. Can one little disheveled, dissatisfied person, kill Abraham Lincoln or John Kennedy and affect the entire history of the world to come? No, there must be some greater, gigantic conspiracy involved here. I think that there's a natural resistance to this business that is absolutely true, that very small things can affect an enormous system, and for countless years and decades and centuries and millennia to come. What do you guys think of that factor?
Well, I'm curious, Allison, have you ever read the Foundation trilogy?
I feel like I read the first one.
How did you read the first one and not the other two? Dave knows.
It was a very long time ago, so I'm trying to remember if I was either. I don't think it was that I didn't like it. I think it was that I got busy.
Okay, all right. The
but
Foundation.
I have read the first one.
The Foundation trilogy.
I know of.
Yeah, it's a series. What was it? Foundation, and Empire, and Second Foundation, written by Isaac Asimov.
Sure.
And the whole premise of it was that this guy, Harry Sheldon, I think his name was, had come up with this theory that would just predict the vast flow of history, and that somehow you could say what was going to happen in the future, and so on and so forth. And of course, now we know that that is just completely nonsensical. The idea that, again, the wrong person is taking a hike somewhere, and there's a pebble on a trail that causes them to slip, and so they go over the edge and they break their neck, and there's nobody there to start a major world war or something like that, and the course of history is just completely changed, or somebody who's designing a ballot in Broward County, Florida, does a bad job of designing the ballot in Broward County, Florida. And, we wind up with the whole damn thing coming off the rails in, 2000 or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of a strange thing that one very tiny event. I mean, an example of it that I kind of like is that you think about a forest fire burning. You've got a huge forest fire burning, and you think about, here's this huge forest fire. And so what in the world could one tiny little ember have to do with the progress of that huge forest fire?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is that if that one tiny little ember winds up getting caught by just exactly the right gust of wind and goes a couple of 100 yards, and it lands here in this little pile of pine needles instead of 2 inches over on what's bare ground, and the little pile of pine needles catches fire and the tree next to it catches fire, and all of a sudden the fire line has jumped over, and next thing you know, the fire is off in an entirely different canyon, and you've had 24 firefighters that are caught in between the lines that are killed, and all of that kind of stuff. Why? Well, because there was a single little ember that wound up landing here instead of there. And that's chaos. And that's kind of what you were talking about, the epidemiology thing. The equations of epidemiology are chaotic. Oh God, keep me, if I start talking about the technical side of that, which is absolutely fascinating, throw something at me. I will try not to do that. I'll just point out that actually it's for the regime where the reproduction number is greater than 1 that they but no, I won't go there. The point is that people imagine, oh, gee, I'm just one person. What can it possibly harm for me to go out and do such and such? And that one person can wind up being that one cinder that, yeah, they went out and they gave it to somebody who gave it to somebody else who drove across country and went here. And before you know it, a meat packing plant in South Dakota has 1,000 cases and 100 people dead or something like that. Such is the nature of chaos.
Well, I think in this situation, again, particularly because a lot of people are asymptomatic. And so it's not just, oh, if I don't feel good, I won't go out. It's that you might feel fine and go out and then, infect people. So it kind of becomes a risk for everyone in a way. But I think a lot of it comes down to kind of 2 things. And one of those is, why are we trying to predict everything at all? And there is always this fear of the unknown. I think people want to know what's going to happen. And that's why part of why I think the fact that we can't predict things is so unnerving, because you can predict certain things. And then, I mean, on the other side of the coin, I think it kind of sometimes causes people to lose faith in the models that are accurate. So, I mean, just because we can't, predict everything out to, the next 3 months doesn't mean we can't predict other things to at least a relatively, good degree of accuracy. And I think it's easy for people to conflate those two points.
Yeah.
You have to be able to believe some of the models with the understanding that obviously, there is a chaotic element to it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's key. One of the things when you're talking about chaos theory or when you're talking about a chaotic system is understanding the difference between things that you can predict and things that you cannot predict.
Right. We can predict the weather out for the next, 2 weeks
well,
extremely well.
There are some aspects of the weather that you can predict.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you say that, actually, it's kind of funny. We lived in Southern California for a long time, and it was amazing because you'd look at the weather map and there would be a solid bank of storm clouds going all the way from California to mainland China. And it was just all marching your direction on the jet stream. And then you would watch the evening news and they would predict it's going to rain all week. And then Friday night, it's going to clear off and we're going to have a beautiful weekend. And then it's going to start raining again on Monday. And of course, it'd rain the whole weekend too. And I'm completely
Rain is one of the hardest things to
convinced.
predict, is what I did learn.
I think actually in that case, it was probably a matter of the Chamber of Commerce was convincing the
Wanted you to
weather
go
people
outside.
to say everything was going to be better. And so we could make lots of money. Go ahead and come on out and go to plan your trip to Disneyland or whatever. And actually I wasn't thinking this when I started telling the story, but that's kind of similar to what's going on right now. Yeah. Don't worry about this thing. Let's open it up, go to work fine. Everything's in good shape. Put some more money in my pocket. But anyway, it's the people hate uncertainty.
Right.
They really don't like uncertainty. And they don't have a sense for chaos, which means they don't have a sense for the difference between things that you can predict and you can't predict. So for example, weather. In a sense, you can predict weather. That is, you can say, all right, the conditions are right. It's the humidity's low and so on and so forth. So we're going to have nice, perfect blue skies and you can be right.
Well, and that's why there's always some kind of percentage involved with that too.
Yeah,
You know, there are
yeah.
errors and they do incorporate those.
Yeah. But then you can also say, okay, the humidity is really high and it's, the desert floor is going to be hot. And so there are very likely going to be thunderstorms. And you don't know exactly where the thunderstorms are going to be. You don't know exactly where the tornado is going to land. You don't know which trailer park is going to be wiped out by the twister this time around. Having grown up in Oklahoma, I actually do know that trailer parks attract tornadoes. And so you cannot say exactly where the tornado is going to hit. You can't say exactly where the lightning is going to hit. But what you can say is that on a day when everything is dry and okay, that you're not going to have thunderstorms. But on a day when the humidity is really high and it's really hot, you are. And that kind of brings you back to the whole pandemic thing, that you can't say exactly where the outbreak is going to be. You can't say exactly when it's going to happen. You can't say any of those things. But what you can say is that if people are spreading the disease, those things will happen. But that if the reproduction number is low, if people are not spreading the disease, they won't.
What percentage of the people who are not concerned about going out and mixing it up now, do you think, is sort of not taking yourself out of the equation? I'm just one person. If I go out and I stand around and talk to some people, I don't feel ill. It's not going to make any difference, really. I'm just one person. And what percentage is it of people, do you think, who were really sort of freaking out about small businesses and so on? And so they're going against what they might really believe about science because they're panicking about existence and about the future here. That's something that's fascinating to me, because you see people going out and if they believe in science at all, it's not the right thing to do. These are apparently otherwise in some ways relatively smart people, but they're ignoring the side of caution. Why is that happening, do you think, psychologically at this point now?
I think it's easier to believe in science when it tells you how big the sun is and how far away it is, because that doesn't really affect your life. But when science starts telling you what not to do, people don't like being told what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably not all of it, but I think that's part of it. Again, it kind of comes down to this: is it affecting me personally? And because I'm not seeing it, then everything must be fine. The science is probably true, but it's true for those people over there and not for me.
I mean, once upon a time, I think that, and I mean, by once upon a time, I'm thinking now about, kind of 50s, 60s and there, the tendency was for people to realize, okay, this is information, this is insight that I can use to actually do things that will make my life better. But then there are folk, and we can start putting labels on those folk. I'll be up front and say a lot of them voted for Reagan, who started saying, we don't like science. And the reason we don't like science is that science tells us that there are things that we don't get to do that we want to. We don't want to have to worry about pollution. And so we're just going to ignore the scientists that talk about that kind of stuff. We don't want to have to worry about whether cigarettes cause cancer. And so we're just going to come up with a way to completely muddle that conversation for decades and such as that. We don't want to have to worry about climate. Because after all, if we have to worry about climate, it means that fossil fuel companies aren't going to make huge tons of money, and Lord knows, and so on and so forth. And it's the same thing with COVID. The thing that I find ironic in all of that is that it's not actually typically the people who are out there carrying their guns into the Michigan State House or whatever who are thinking these things or who are coming up with the ideas, but rather it's a bunch of folk, like in the case of COVID, who are sitting there at home, completely hunkered in, completely protected from everything, looking at their bank accounts and telling other people to go out and march in the streets so that they can reopen. The thing that I don't understand in all of this is that somehow saying you need to stay at home so that we can get this thing under control down to a level where we can contact trace and where we can, have a chance of keeping up with the medical needs and all of that. Somehow that is taking away people's rights. But telling people who work in a meat plant that they have to go into work and they have to work on a line where they know that a substantial fraction around them are people who are ill with this thing, and where a significant number of people who they know have already died of it, and somehow that's freedom. And this whole thing sort of seems like
well, they're free to quit. That's why.
They're free to quit. But if they quit, they're not free to quit, because if they quit, they don't get any unemployment.
Well,
Jeff.
Anyway.
Jeff.
Yes.
Do you want to live in a world without bologna?
I haven't eaten bologna in so long. Bacon is a different story, but bologna. You should have said bacon.
I want to live in a world where the people who are making the bologna are actually, I don't really care for bologna, but I'm a big fan of, I will admit, I'm a big fan of steak. I like my steaks. I like my bacon. Sorry about that.
Right.
I just want to live in the world where the people who are doing that kind of stuff
are not
are safe.
Are safe.
Right. Yeah.
Again, it comes down to protecting the workers, and no, it's not freedom to fear for your life and not be able to quit. That is
no.
And I mean, but again, that's the argument that I've heard is, well, they're free to quit. They don't have to do it. And the answer is not really. So.
Not really.
And if they all quit, then who's going to make your bologna for you? So everybody loses anyway.
I don't want any bologna.
I mean, the other thing, and we've talked about this before, but I'm gonna toss it in again. Okay, we're talking about, to back it up, we are talking about chaos. We're talking about the fact that in some regimes, very, very tiny changes can have huge bad results. And in other regimes, you can get it under control. And so what we're talking about here is having a lockdown that is good enough for long enough to get us into that regime that's more like where you can predict clear days instead of severe weather. And then once you get it there, you can contact trace, and now you've bought medical folk time to do things, and you can save probably in the end hundreds of thousands of lives by investing a few more months of keeping things locked down. I had people, you go back and look at what it took during World War II, for example, and you look at the inconvenience of World War II as compared with the inconvenience of COVID. And these people thinking that they should be able to yeah, I don't care about hundreds of thousands of lives as long as I get my haircut is just insane. But in this society, if you look at it and say, okay, we just need to shut things down, and we need to shut things down for long enough to get the case rate down to the point that now, using good public health procedures, we can keep things well controlled. And you look at the resources that we have in this nation, where, as we've talked about before, the average worker today is producing twice as much as they were producing in 1980, even though they are getting the same real wage. And you think about that for a second and you say, okay, what that means then is that I could work half time and still be producing as much as I was in 1980. And that if I were being paid the fraction of my production that I was in 1980, that I could still have the same quality of life. And the answer is, yeah, that's what that means. Say, well, where did all of that other stuff go? Well, look at what has happened to the balance of wealth. You know, all of those resources have been going somewhere, and they have been going into the pockets of the Walton family and folk like that. These huge accumulations of wealth, and we've been hearing about that. The other thing that means, of course, is that we could, in principle, have 50% unemployment. And because of technology, such as that 50% of people could, in fact, be producing enough so that no one would have to go hungry. No one would have to go without a roof over their heads. All you have to do is say, no, we're going to use that production to support the workers, to support people, instead of putting it into the pockets of the wealthy. But that's the one thing that just seems unthinkable. You know, we've spent trillions of dollars now saying we're going to bail everybody out. Who we're bailing out are largely large corporations. And then when it comes time to pay those loans back, we're going to pay those loans back using regressive taxes, which means that it's going to be the people on the bottom who are now coughing up the money to put even more money into the pockets of the people at the top. It's insane. It is absolutely insane. And yeah, and then you see Bubba with his gun overcompensating for something in the Michigan State House, screaming into the face of some poor cop who's going to get sick from it, but is somehow maintaining his or her cool. Anyway, okay. I'll stop my rant now. I'll shut up.
How is it that the people who are generally speaking losing the most from this situation are out there protesting, wanting to fire things up right away again, and potentially getting sick from it? There's some irony involved here, isn't there?
I think there's a lot of irony involved. Yeah. Where to start? But no, I mean, yeah, I think the people that are being the loudest about opening up are not the people that have the most to actually lose by leaving it, by doing that. Obviously, they have a lot to lose by not opening up, and not even that. Again, you know, I've talked to people who just want to go out and just don't want their lives to be affected by this. They're not necessarily, you know, maybe they're concerned about, you know, their bank account, but I think for the most part, people just got used to the life that they had and they want that back. And it's hard to give things up. Of course it is. And a lot of people just don't want to do it, especially when they don't see how one person going to the grocery store 3 times a week is really going to affect that. So there's a lot of factors at play, and not all of them are necessarily financially motivated. Some people just really want that lifestyle back. It's uncomfortable to give things up, and people don't like being uncomfortable, especially when they look out the window and things look okay.
So you're saying that fundamentally there are a bunch of 3-year-olds out there that are pounding their feet and saying, wah, 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 I want my cookie. I want my cookie. I don't care what you say. I want my cookie.
Some of them, yes. I think that is part of it.
So, I mean,
I have talked to some people who didn't want to wear a mask because it was too hot outside.
Yeah.
I mean, on the other hand, my sister and I are having these conversations, which is, we're both runners, and we're like, should we be wearing masks when we're running? What is the protocol here? We're trying to figure it out and be smart about it. And, I think, a lot of runners and people that are, that exercise outside, a lot of people are trying to be very cognizant of, what we should be doing, not necessarily just to protect ourselves, but to protect others. And so there's a lot of competing groups of people out there.
Yeah. Well, and then that comes back to the whole chaos thing, though, which is, people have, I suspect most people have at least heard the term Typhoid Mary. They may or may not understand who Typhoid Mary really was. Typhoid Mary was a woman, and it was New York City, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, I think it was New York.
Yeah.
And a nurse.
And a nurse, yeah, who had typhoid but was asymptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was just going about her business, one person who was asymptomatic giving everybody typhoid.
Mm-hmm.
I think they,
and I forget how many deaths
cases
they lay at her feet, but it's a large number.
I was just looking this up, but I don't remember exactly. But yeah, there were a large number of cases attributed to her, and obviously a fraction of those were deaths. But yeah, it's that same thing where it's, I feel fine. Why should I be affected? I've probably already had it, so I'm safe. There's a lot of that going around. And I mean, in a sense, that's tempting. I mean, all of us want to believe maybe we had it and just didn't have symptoms, because that would be the easy way out. That's
well, and when and if we all start to get tested, we may find out that some of us had it and had minor symptoms or no symptoms. And again, it raises this idea, will there be for a while before there's a real systematic vaccine program, sort of, a dual class of people.
Right. And I mean, it's concerning to me too, because everyone seems to think that just being tested for antibodies is the solution. But if you have antibodies, you could still be positive and still be shedding. We don't know how long you shed the virus. So that almost makes you more dangerous in a way, because now you think you're safe, and now you're becoming the next Typhoid Mary. And, it's a very a little bit of information sometimes can be a very dangerous thing when it's not the full picture.
Yeah. And Nancy just chimed in, making the point very well. One big irony is that some of these overcompensating macho types with guns are being total baby sissies over doing a relatively easy thing compared to those they supposedly admire, like the veterans of the big 20th century wars. I've had that conversation with people, and it's but we should all be willing to give up our lives for the values of our country and so on and so forth.
The value of your country is to live a happy and healthy life, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The fundamental thing there is what are the values of our country? And
Not to make money.
And I think that we have gotten to the point where the people who are putting the idea in the ears of those. We've talked about Mel Brooks movies before. And the scene in Blazing Saddles where Gene Wilder and Cleavon Little are talking about the people and the salt of the earth and so, morons. Yeah. Okay. The morons.
Farmers. Exactly.
Yeah. Are being told by Fox News, and they're being told by the idiot in the White House, and they're being told by all of these people who are representing the moneyed class that, you are having your rights infringed upon, go out and protest and all of these kinds of things. They are cannon fodder. They are being used as cannon fodder, pure and simple. You start hearing about folk who are leaders of these movements getting COVID and dying. That's starting to happen. You see Pence dancing around the Mayo Clinic refusing to wear a mask. You really kind of wish that what he would do is go and visit all of these people who are protesting for him, and they can all get together and not wear masks. And then, Darwin can just have his say about what happens, and that removes some of the problem. But yeah, anyway. So how do we get a handle on? I mean, again, chaos theory, we are in the regime where the chaotic system is behaving badly. We are in the regime where it's spreading in a way that the cinders fly and new fires pop up. We've got a bunch of people who have never actually been in a COVID ward claiming that, oh, it's just a little flu, despite the fact that it's overwhelming healthcare systems. You look at the actual case fatality rate, and if you look at the number of confirmed COVID deaths divided by the number of confirmed COVID cases, we are hanging in there at a case fatality rate right now of about 8%. And people will say, oh, but no, that's just because we're missing so many of these asymptomatic cases, and really it's just another little flu. Okay, that's a factor you have to worry about. Of course, you also have to worry about the factor that we are missing huge numbers of deaths. You look at the death rate in New York City in the peak of this thing, and it was 6 times the rate at which official COVID cases were popping up. And a great many of those were under circumstances that very well could have been directly caused by COVID. We just don't know the answer to the question of exactly how deadly this is. We do know that it is well on its way to killing 100,000 plus, and probably plus in a big way. We do know it's overwhelming healthcare systems. We do know that the deaths are horrendous deaths. These are not fun things. We do know that the people who survive it, many of them are compromised in ways that are going to be with them for the rest of their lives. And then you see Bubba out there with his AK-47 screaming about how he can't get his haircut and he's having his rights taken away because somebody on Fox News told him that's what he's supposed to think. I don't know. I Anyway, yeah. Where does it end? Where does this go?
There's chaos in society as well as chaos in scientific, molecular, and atomic systems. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And I think, at least the thing that I always think of is that people are chaotic, inherently chaotic. And yeah, you can predict what people are likely to do and probably what most people will do. But again, in this kind of case, all it takes is that one person or that one ember to basically wreck the whole experiment all over again, which is why these lockdowns need to be as secure and need to go on for some time, because obviously nothing's going to be perfect. You can try to lock things down, and of course someone's always going to go outside because that's how people act. People are going to be unpredictable, and there obviously is some of that in our projections. You have to assume that people aren't going to follow the rules. Because someone's always not going to, for whatever reason. And you can't even, it could be any one of these reasons or a completely different reason.
Let me ask you a behavioral question. Are people more self-centered now than they ever have been in the past, in this country or elsewhere? Is this a generation that if we were, say, attacked, they would go and by the millions fight a world war for 6 years? This seems like a generation that is really mostly just focused on what they themselves want.
It's hard to answer, I think. There's a little bit of that kids these days mentality that, we all kind of want to fall into. I feel like there are a lot of people that would. I feel like, there is still a core group of Americans that would still act like what we want Americans to act like. But I feel like there's probably some large groups of people that would not. And I mean, we do have to remember that, even in World War II, not everyone was for war, and, things changed over time. So it might be a little bit of that too. But
Well,
obviously we're
there was
seeing
a
things change over time.
Mhm.
great resistance and
Yeah.
isolationism until the morning of December 7th,
Right.
1941. Yeah.
And I feel like at this point, I mean, this has already been compared badly to Pearl Harbor.
Mhm.
But maybe that wasn't our Pearl Harbor. Maybe this isn't our Pearl Harbor yet. I don't know what would be. It kind of scares me as to what would be at this point. But
That's what I'm really asking here is,
right.
the people who are going out and disregarding things and mixing up and protesting, are those, is it really, I don't feel personally affected by this, so the hell with the other people, I'm going to do what I want. Is that really what's driving this? To ignore the science and
Yeah.
to take risks and to panic about the short-term economic situation that they may be in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is it really a good part of this? Is it lack of understanding, or is it selfishness, or is it an equal mixture?
A little bit of
It's
both. I think it's also partly, again, we're almost victims of our own success.
yeah.
We have been peaceful and healthy and, relatively
Mhm.
prosperous for some time. And I mean, obviously there were minor recessions, but even that is old enough now that it's no longer in the public memory. It's what, like 5 years or something. So
Yep.
in the public memory, things have been great. And why should we have to give that up now?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a
It would be.
short-term memory. Yep.
It's a shame that we don't have a significant number of people around who actually remember World War II
Mm.
and who actually remember the Spanish flu and who actually remember the Great Depression. And I
If
mean,
you go to the
it's
World War II Museum, the National World War II Museum's website, they've got a lot of really good webinars right now that are free that you
do
can
they
watch. And some of them
do
are on
they?
this. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
neat. That's worth. I will definitely check that out
Yeah.
because it's looking here. I mean, Jerry brings up an interesting point, saying that, at least when things go badly, we know that physical distance can reset the experiment. We would rather not do that many times in terms of thinking about what comes next. And that's the thing that I think people don't understand, that you're fighting a fire, and when you're fighting a fire, nobody would be stupid enough to look and say, okay, that fire has only been consuming 1,000 new acres a day for the last few weeks. And as long as it's just consuming 1,000 new acres a day for the last few weeks, I guess that means it's all okay and everybody can move back in.
Mm-hmm.
That's the argument that is being made now.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there are new, fires popping up all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
that what you have to do to get past this thing is you actually have to bring it down to that point. We're not. If you look around the country, there are some places that are leveled, but there are other places that it's just taking off.
Mm-hmm.
And those places where it's just taking off are starting to be more and more significant in the statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time that people are imagining that models say, oh, it's supposed to start getting better, it's really going to be getting worse. A lot of it, I think that it is, though, a matter. You were asking the question about why people believe this. It's several things. One, as Allison was saying, is that they just haven't gotten to the point where they can believe that they might ever have to live in a world where they would have to sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
The notion of them having to sacrifice is just not something that they can wrap their heads around.
Beyond them, really. That
It's
conceptually beyond them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It does not fit into their picture of reality.
Well,
No.
that's a little bit how climate change works too, right?
Yeah.
People don't want to accept that I'm going to have to change my lifestyle, so they don't, and things keep getting worse. So I think it's kind of parallel to that.
Yep.
Not to
Yeah.
take over.
Yeah.
Yep.
But you've got that. The other thing that you've got again, and this is what that whole world is built on, is there is a group of people who, to be a member of that group, means that you have to believe what you're told.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they say it on Fox News, then you have to believe it, because if they say it on Fox News and you don't believe it, then you're kicked out of the group. And the one thing that humans just cannot tolerate is being kicked out of the group.
We've talked about that before, and how that
Yeah.
goes back to the plains of Africa, that group membership psychology.
Yep.
How not in a poor sense, but in a scientific sense, it's a primitive, deeply held necessity of people.
Mm-hmm.
And when it aligns against scientific reality, it's a problem.
So I have a question for you, Dave. How close has this thing come to you?
The infection itself.
The infection, yeah, COVID.
I know of no one locally or geographically close in space to me with it. However, in the last month or so, after it being mostly a distant thing that I was following very carefully, news reporting on, that was largely in New York City and elsewhere, over the last month or 6 weeks or so, there are quite a number of people. I have a lot of friends on social media who are magazine readers who I don't know really well, but quite a large number. A large number of those people, I would say, 20, 30, 40 people over the last weeks have relatives they've reported on who are either ill, and a few have died of COVID. So it's only struck me really when it comes to the acquaintance level of acquaintances who are interested in amateur astronomy or in other sciences or in mineralogy and so on, to the tune of several dozen now.
What about you, Allison?
Probably kind of on that level as well. I know I mentioned probably to you guys last week and not to anyone else, but my dad needed to have a procedure done. Very simple procedure, nothing big, but they actually decided to put it off because it's not serious enough yet. And he was like, I could drive over to Indiana and get it done because they're wherever. But it's been very frustrating because it's a condition that's affecting at least his quality of life a little bit. I don't believe it's necessarily dangerous, but it's kind of this thing he would like to get taken care of. And in a world like this, you can't, and that's been very difficult. I mean, fortunately, again, no one close to me has gotten it. My stepmother actually works in a hospital, and she's been fortunate enough to work from home, so she has not been going in. And on the day she goes in, she basically, comes home, goes immediately into the shower, sort of thing, clothes go immediately into the wash. So they've been very careful, but I don't think I've known anyone necessarily, again, above the acquaintance level. But that's, again, I consider myself fortunate, in that sense. And I don't know how long that will last.
Yeah. I mean, we're at the point. We're up to, I mean, clearly we're going to be on the high side of 100,000 deaths before too terribly long. We're at, what are we right now?
Well, in the 60s.
60s, I think, right?
Yeah, somewhere in the 65 or something like that. And we're burning through at something like 2,000 a day. And so, what that means is that in another couple of weeks, we're going to be up in the neighborhood of 100,000. And that's going to be the case because the number of deaths just follows the number of reported cases. And the number of reported cases is marching along. So the number of deaths is going to stay there. And so we're still at the point where, for most people, this thing is a fire that they can see just over the hill. And as long as the fire is just over the hill, then why in the world should they have to evacuate their house? They're the people who are down in Key West or someplace saying, "Oh, don't tell me about hurricanes. I'm just gonna stay in my home." And then suddenly the fire actually comes over the crest. Suddenly the hurricane actually does arrive. and it becomes a very, very different thing.
Mhm.
Oh, actually,
Yeah, it
number of
looks like just
people,
68.
Mike just chimed in and said that we're at 68,442.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So we're
And
not gonna be in
Mike,
the
if you're
60s much
staring at
longer.
if you're staring at the data, what has been the average daily death rate for the last few days?
I would guess that's probably in the thousands.
It's been hanging in there around
been high.
2,000, I think is
Yeah.
about where it's been.
Yeah, or
hanging in
maybe
there.
a smidge less than 2,000.
And again,
Yeah.
those are just clearly attributable cases, which is not all
Yeah.
of them.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's not the sum total.
And I mean, I think
Clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest problem with all of this, as we've said many times, is we just don't have the real numbers.
Mhm.
There's
No.
so many people that are asymptomatic. There are so many
Yeah.
people that are not being tested that it's easy, again, to believe that situation of, well, maybe everyone will get it and just not know, or maybe I've already had it and I just didn't know. And I mean, that's very tempting, but it's not going to be the case.
Did you guys see the article in, there's an op-ed, I think, in Scientific American by an epidemiologist talking about the comparisons between COVID and the flu, the influenza.
I have read an article on that, but I don't know if it was that
And it
particular
was
one,
it
but-
was pointing out, again, it's how you count things. And it was pointing out that when you hear people talk about, oh, there are 60,000 people a year killed by the flu or something like that, those are statistical models where you count the number of people that you know were killed by the flu, and then you do a bunch of corrections and so on and so forth. If you were to count the number of people killed by the flu in the way that you're currently counting the number of people killed by COVID, then you wouldn't be saying there were 60,000 people a year being killed by the flu. You would be saying there were somewhere between about 3 and maybe 10,000 people a year being killed by the flu. And so it's completely crazy counting statistics. Yeah, Mike said right now they're hanging in there at about 1,500 to 2,000. So if we're at 68 now, you know, we're talking about another
2 days.
32, and another 32 at 2,000 is 16. So yeah, maybe two and a half, 3 weeks from now, we're going to be at 100,000.
Yeah. Mhm.
And 100,000, and after that we're going to be at 150,000, and after that we're going to be at more than that.
Mhm.
And we were promised it was all going to go away by
summer, right?
sometime in March, and then we were promised it was all going to go away by April 1st, and then we were all going to be able to go to church and have big services on Easter, and it's all going to go away by Memorial Day, and it's all going to go away by summer. Guess what? It hasn't gone away. None of those predictions have been correct.
Well, we haven't.
The models that try to predict it are subject to the chaos that we were talking about, and the models have not been correct in their predictions that things will turn down.
To do what we need to do to make the danger go away, we've done essentially nothing thus far.
Yeah.
That's the
need
bottom
to actually
line.
enforce lockdown.
We're going to need to test everyone and come up with a vaccine, we hope.
So what does the rest of the world think now when they, the rest of the world, you look at places like New Zealand, for example, where they got serious about it and are talking about maybe effectively having eradicated this thing. Australia, the same. There have been very strong responses in places like Singapore and South Korea. And, even in Europe, where there were huge outbreaks, they have been serious about bringing those down.
Yep.
And then you look at the United States, and the United States is supposed to be, the world leader in how we deal with this kind of stuff. And the United States is, okay, we're not seeing exponential rise anymore, but nor are we seeing any kind of substantial reduction.
Well, and we have many more. We have more cases here than any other country as well.
So what does the rest of the world think when they look at the United States right now?
Probably feeling sorry for us because we can't get our crap together. Is mostly how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think because especially a lot of those countries that, I mean, what seems to me to be happening is a lot of Americans are looking at those countries that had very effective responses and being like, well, why are they so successful and why aren't we? And the answer is because you're not being effective, because you're not listening to the rules, because you don't want your rights trampled on, whereas in other parts of the world, people were willing to give up that freedom for 2 weeks or 2 months in order to get rid of this, and you're not. And so that's why you're in this situation. And
Right.
it's hard to see, honestly.
Hmm.
We in some cases have a uniquely immature psychology in this country,
Yeah.
I would argue.
And I mean, maybe that's recent. Maybe, you know, it wasn't that case
Oh, it certainly
in
wasn't
you know,
always.
the 40s.
Certainly.
I don't know, but you know, I feel like it is relatively recent.
Most certainly was not always this way.
And again, kind of victims of our own success. You know,
Yeah.
we've kind of come to see America as not necessarily being a place of freedom, but of being able to do whatever the heck you want. And that's
Yeah.
not necessarily the
A
case.
land
Yeah.
of entitlement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And what you were talking about, what people know, Vicky chimed in and pointed out that, Dave, you and I are giving away our age.
Yes.
That,
Yep.
you know, the 70s, for an awful lot of folk, the 70s were a long, long time ago.
Yes, indeed.
You
Yep.
know, the 70s were for them what kind of World War I was for us when we were
Right.
kids.
Right.
And yeah, there is just no experience with it. So is it essential? Is the way that it works is that the whole thing, once every generation effectively, or every couple of generations, the whole thing has to burn down around our ears just to remind people that they can't just do whatever the hell they want to do.
I hate to say it, but I think the answer is probably yes.
I would agree. History does repeat itself, and there are reasons for that. And
Yeah.
I think, again, the collective consciousness is just not that long.
Yeah.
Mm.
In fact, I think it's interesting if you go back and look at what's going on now and compare it with what went on a century ago.
Mhm.
You know, a century ago, we were in a gilded age,
Mm.
you know, where it's been about a century since the wealth imbalance was as severe as it is now.
Mhm.
You go and you look at the kinds of things going on in meat packing plants today, and I really do need to go and reread The Jungle.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
where's Upton Sinclair when you need him?
Right.
And then you look at the path out of that, and the path out of that was that things got so bad that, ironically, it was folk in the part of the country where you now say that's Trump's heartland, who were the ones that were progressives and rose up and said, this just won't do, and gave rise to the progressive movements that gave rise to progressive taxation, that gave rise to federal programs to build infrastructure, that gave rise to regulations to limit the damage that big moneyed interests can do, you know, anti-monopoly legislation that gave rise to all of these things. And it was that world, you know, that was what then helped defeat the Axis powers during World War II. That was the world that gave rise to building all of the infrastructure that was built during the 50s and the 60s, upon which we still rely.
Mhm.
You know, you hear these folk harken back. Boy, I want to go back to the good old days of the 1950s. And you say, yeah, let's look at the good old days of the 1950s. The good old days of the 1950s, when the top marginal tax rate was something around 90%. You know, the good old days of the 1960s, when the antitrust laws and such as that were really stringent because people remembered why they were there. You know, the good old days of the 50s, when, you know, you talk about Ike was, you know, this wonderful Republican Ike, but if you actually look at his policies, hell, he's would today be somewhere way on the left of somebody like Klobuchar, for crying out loud. They just don't understand the history of all of that. And unfortunately, I really do worry that we've reached the point that we're just going to have to learn all of those lessons all over again. Things are going to have to get really bad until we start figuring out that, the wealthy folk who have been taking theirs off the top now for a long time are actually going to have to start chipping some of that back into society to right the ship, that workers are actually going to have to really be protected, that unions were a good thing after all, that there was a reason why we put in place banking regulations. There was a reason why we put in place social safety nets. And they're going to be so we are at that point where either those things are going to happen or we are going to become Venezuela.
Unfortunately, a lot of people, and I think you were alluding to this, Allison, people tend to live in the moment they're in, and the historical recollection or lessons from the past is very shallow for most people. And the ability to look forward at what will happen down the road as a consequence of what I'm doing right now, most people just don't give a damn. They want what they want now, and they don't want to have to deal with the past or the future. And we're having to live with that with at least a good percentage of the population right now.
Jerry chimed in with an interesting point. He says, maybe not if education featured books which were firsthand works about life in those hard times. I certainly read about epidemic disease, even in Laura Ingalls Wilder, All of a Kind, and, so on and so forth. That actually raises an interesting question, which is, what could the role, I don't know about books. People don't read enough books these days. I would love to live in the world. If we lived in the world where you could fix the problem by the books that people read, we wouldn't be having this problem. Let's be honest. Right. But popular media.
Hey, who are you calling names at people now?
Am I calling names of?
We're popular media, aren't we, Allison?
We try to be.
Use some expletives at it.
Yes. All of you people out there right now who are listening, whether live or downstream, it is your job to turn us into popular media. Okay. It's your job to go out there and spread the word. Remember, the way that chaos works is that if you will all go out and tell lots of other people, then you can be the ember that spreads the word of scientists stuck inside trying to speak sanity to the world. And when it comes back to us that somehow Jared Kushner has decided that scientists stuck inside is a voice that simply has to be stomped out, then we
will successful.
We will have been successful.
Well, that has been an hour, just for the record.
That has been an hour. Okay. All right.
I think that might be a reasonable place to start.
So what are we? Good discussion. So where shall we go? We're gonna talk on Thursday.
Yeah, we'll solve more of it later this week.
We'll solve more of the world's problems, and let's think about which piece of this. There are just so many interesting pieces of this. I think the chaos theory actually provided us with a good toehold into this.
And this is going to be a long run for us to deal with all this stuff, aside from that one little tiny wonderful butterfly.
Right. Yeah, I did think it was funny. At the very start, we thought, well, should we really call ourselves scientists stuck inside in case it doesn't last for very long? And that thought lasted for about 20 milliseconds until we said, no.
We're going to be inside for a while.
I think we're going to be that for a while. That'll be okay. All right, everybody.
Thanks,
Enjoy.
everyone.
Yep.
Take care. Be safe.
Go watch Star Wars.
Absolutely be safe and come join us again on Thursday.
We'll see you soon on Thursday. Yeah.
All
Take
right.
care.
Take care. Bye-bye.